Final Fantasy XIV's 6th major expansion post-relaunch, EVERCOLD, coming January 2027, was just recently announced. So let's analyze the teaser trailer like it's a new Xenoblade reveal to try and figure out where the story is going to go next. This will require spoilers up through Dawn Trail patch 7.4. 7.5 is not out. It will be in a few days as of the time I'm recording this, and I don't know if this will be out in time for that new patch. So if I don't talk about things that happen in 7.5 and make predictions about 7.5, that is why. I am also only going to be talking about the story in this video, saving all of the system changes also announced at NA FanFest for later, purely because I'm recording this almost immediately after the keynote ended, so the Day 1 FanFest livestream is still going, meaning I can't download anything more than just the teaser trailer, and the developer panel where they talk about Reborn and Evolved mode hasn't even happened yet, so I don't have all the information on that stuff yet. This is just about the MSQ. Though I will say, Takashi Kiryu has finally defied all odds and done one good thing as CEO of Square Enix, that being giving the 14 development team the higher budget they probably should have had half a decade ago, considering the game is the only thing keeping Square profitable these days.
Oh, also, why is the Alliance Raid series Evangelion? I get Yoshi P is apparently a fan, but Square, you own Xenogears, the better philosophical mecha-based thing from the 90s, that would have cost much less to implement considering you don't have to pay licensing, and would also allow more new Xenogears covers and remixes. And also, the music wouldn't be copyrighted, screwing over people streaming and making videos of the game, like already happened with the announcement. Just saying. Just because 14's version of Monk is based on Sabin doesn't mean Fei Fong Wong can't be in the game somewhere else.
Anyway, EVERCOLD is the second entry in what has now been officially defined by the developers as the second major story arc of the game, the Godless Realms saga. And I know Dawn Trail was initially propped up as either some kind of a bridge thing or taking a bit of a breather in between the intensity of the end of Endwalker and whatever's coming next, but on top of the key showing up for the first time, I think there are several things explored in 7.0 that are going to be relevant enough for the overarching story going forward that we can consider at least 7.0, if not the 6.x series, as the actual beginning of this new saga. And that's because of the name, Godless Realms. Realms, plural, seems to indicate that it is referring to the source and all of the reflections, and not simply other regions on the source. Namely because if you count Zero's brief visit to the Crystarium, just in between 6.2 and 8.0, in addition to all the exploring of the source we did throughout Dawn Trail, we will have visited the 1st, the 13th, the 9th, and now the 4th. So that actually leaves only the 8th and 11th of non-rejoined shards that we will not have touched at all. And that's assuming we don't go anywhere else in EVERCOLD. This seems to be very important because the gold text at the beginning of the teaser first reads, "Hold fast to what you must and meet your fate without fear," and then, "Go forth, discover, unite the stars unto one." This could mean several things, one of which being the confirmation of a theory I've had for a while, but first we need to talk about the godless part, because that's not just referring to myths of the realm and getting rid of the 12. That's referring to the absence of Hydaelyn and Zodiark, because we already had Halmoret's teaser about the echo in the absence of the will of the star, and because Halmoret is not a traditional Convocation member, she didn't seem to care much about Zodiark being gone. She was referring to Hydaelyn in that case. So, Zodiark was stopping the calamity of the final days. But what if Hydaelyn's continued existence was propping up the shards, preventing a different kind of calamity? Now, clearly, once Zodiark got awoken, we did have to kill him, and I don't know if there was another way to stop the final days without Hydaelyn also dying, so I don't think it's a case of us accidentally dooming all the reflections because we made the wrong choice during Endwalker, but it is a consequence of Hydaelyn not being around. And that does make a lot of sense to me, because Hydaelyn was the one who did the Sundering in the first place, so something about her power of stasis or the Mother Crystal existing in the Source's ethereal sea may very well have been the thing keeping the shards alive in the first place. If an entire reflection is an alternate dimension only 1/14th as dense as the original Aetheris was, there's a good chance that it might just fade away, or drift away from the source and be unable to sustain itself over time, and Hydaelyn's stasis was keeping the ether of each of the reflections contained in a way to prevent something like that from happening. This makes sense with Halmarut blaming us for what she sees as the inevitable demise of the Ninth, and the implied goals of the Winters as an organization, which appear to be the preservation of life or records of that life at all costs, even if it means killing real living people to sustain a small population of Endless. The other thing worth noting is that according to the story being told during the teaser trailer, the Fourth had an environmental disaster causing the entire surface to be covered in ice. And given that the ice covering is referred to as the world below, that leads me to believe that all the teased areas so far, and in the keynote they made a very big distinction about the fact that, oh, this isn't winter, but the expansion's called Evercold, what about that? Are all some kind of artificial floating island. Maybe not exactly like Az's Law, but more a case of raising chunks of the ground into the air to provide warm places to live. So the general structure of the Fourth might be something along the lines of a Nordic steampunk Grand Blue fantasy, or as I like to call it, Xenoblade Chronicles 2. I think this is going to be good both from an environmental variety case and from a geographical variety case, because we do know from Shadowbringers that the shards do have the same continents and stuff as the source does, and I think the zones in that expansion being remixes of Eorzea is something that will only work once, so it's a very good choice to make all of the regions explorable on the Fourth, nothing tied to the geography of the source at all, so it won't get repetitive of places we've been to or places we will go in the future. But doesn't this whole structure seem kind of familiar? A world covered in one specific element, with only small pockets of places people can live remaining, making use of their technology to survive in a hostile environment? Yeah, that's basically what we saw with the Ninth, just with a different element. I'm guessing at some point during our interactions with Halmarut, we're going to learn a little bit more about the Ascians' plans for the rejoinings. And that is that after the 13th got screwed up and turned into the Void, there were 12 shards remaining, and they tipped 2 shards to each of the 6 elements because they didn't know which ones they could rejoin faster. The Calamity of Lightning that actually happened was the second Umbral Calamity, which rejoined the 12th. So I'm theorizing then that the 9th was the backup Calamity of Lightning in case they screwed that one up, or the timescale shifted so that the 9th could be rejoined to the source faster. In this case, the 4th was supposed to be a backup Calamity of Ice for the 6th, which was rejoined in the 5th Calamity, coincidentally the same one that sent the Malala into the 9th in the first place. This would then mean that the 7th, the shard rejoined in the 7th Umbral Calamity, the successful Darkness-aligned one, was originally tipped towards another one of the 6 elements we don't know, likewise for the first before it was tipped towards light, as well as the 8th and the 11th, which we'll be able to process of elimination figure out what the 7th and 1st were once we see those shards and what elements those were tipped towards. So there's a lot of talk about shards. We've been doing a lot of shard hopping recently. We've been doing a lot of going forth and discovering and having the key, which we can see in the opening cinematic is fusing with the Azim crystal next to a diagram of the source and the shards, so yeah, that is probably how we're getting to the 4th. But what does unite the stars into one mean? It could just mean providing proper communication and travel across all of the reflections, and maybe just a way to siphon ether from the source safely into them, so they can continue to exist safely. But I do honestly think that as the successor to Hydaelyn, who once was Azim in her past life, we are eventually going to end up undoing the Sundering and rejoin the remaining 6 shards to the source. On the surface, this would be a bad thing because it would be killing countless lives and be no better than what the Ascians were doing in the first place, which, yeah, that makes sense. Why the Winters would be against us then? If the only options they can see for the future of the shards are a slow death from stagnation, or a fast cataclysmic one via rejoining, I could understand why they would be against us, but clearly we're not going to let that happen. In these godless realms, those set adrift bereft of their gods, both the demonic one of sacrifice keeping a shroud over the skies protecting from dangers from above, and the benevolent one of hope guiding souls in the afterlife and preventing a rot from within, we will be their saviors, not by killing them and making them part of us, but by bringing them closer to the source in a safe way. We're going to do rejoinings, but in a way much closer to the dimensional fusion that we saw in Dawntrail. There is at least one person in Dawntrail who is very obviously the shard of someone from the source that we know, and several other implications, and yet They didn't get rejoined. Not when the dimensional fusion happened, and not when the dome was opened to the outside world. So via the key, it is somehow possible to transport material and souls and physical bodies of people from the shards to the source, so all we need to figure out how to do is yoink everybody from the shards over without needing something like the Alexandria Dome or bringing over the corrupted etherical balance that happened in Heritage Found. If the fourth is structured the way I think it is, this is probably the easiest shard to do this with, because if basically all of the life is already living on floating islands, you could just yoink the floating islands with everyone on them and plop them out in the sky of the source with no real issue happening. And I don't know if you could then safely rejoin the empty planet of the fourth once everyone's off it. I don't know about that aspect, but I think at least rescuing the people from it would be a relatively simple thing to do compared to some of the alternatives. All this being said, the final line of gold text is "Let none bar your path," which does seem a little bit ominous. Yeah, there was talk about the bearer of the key being subject to whatever fate's whims are regarding it from 7.4, but this almost seems like the idea of uniting the shards is a bad thing even still, even if we have the key and could potentially do it properly. Or it could just be possible that the text isn't directed at Azim, the Warrior of Light, or the Traveler, as we are defined in this new trailer, at all. It could be directed at a member of the Winterers, one of the new antagonists, or one of the new characters we see in this trailer, because by the looks of it, there are 4 new characters, and 3 of them are All-Ra, which is pretty neat. The important thing to point out, though, is that, while yes, we're getting a massive increase in character customization options, including eye, hair, and skin color, I'm guessing NPCs are still going to have rhyme and reason to the choices made for all of those features with them, and aren't just going to be completely random besides race choice. Halmerit's green scales are likely an early teaser of this, but I do think it's worth noting that all 3 All-Ra we see in the teaser do not look like her. It was pretty easy to theorize that Halmerit came from a different shard that we hadn't seen before, because she had a Nordic accent, when the only Nordic-themed areas we know of on the source are primarily populated by Rogaden, with Dalmascan Vieira also retaining the Icelandic accent pioneered by FF12, despite the region they come from not being remotely inspired by Iceland. So a lizard with an accent in that family would be extremely out of place in the source, leading to the easy conclusion of her being from elsewhere. But she's a modified Rain. All 3 All-Ra that appear in the teaser have horn colors and skin tones that are primarily associated with Zayla. Now, it's entirely possible that those ethnic distinctions don't exist or exist in a different way on the fourth versus the source, or Halmerit was raised into an Ascian so long ago that the average-looking lizard just is different in the present day. But I also think it is worth noting that both the young All-Ra being told the story and the old storyteller seem to still have English accents. So there is a distinct possibility that Halmerit is still from somewhere else. To be fair though, the kind of oracle-looking All-Ra woman who kind of seems similar to Aerith and disintegrates into snow does have the exact same horn shape as Halmerit, so there might be a connection there. And she was also drawn by Yoshitaka Amano into the logo for the expansion, so there is a very good chance I'm completely off base on this. Personally, I think it would be a little bit more interesting if Halmerit originally came from the 6th and lost her home shard to the Calamity of Ice, and is now looking at another Aura-populated frozen world on the brink in the 4th, and that affecting her philosophy and her actions throughout the expansion, if indeed she is a major character. Keep in mind, we don't actually see Halmerit and Calyx in the trailer. We know we're going face-to-face with them in 7.5 at some point, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be the main focus or the main antagonists of EVERCOLD. What we learn about the Winterers and any actions they take in the upcoming patches is likely going to be our motivation to learning more about the key and eventually going to the 4th, but it is entirely possible the main conflict of the expansion is something political within the civilization of the 4th, or an impending natural disaster as a result of Zodiark and Hydaelyn being gone, with fighting against the new antagonistic faction not being the main focus. Yes, this all does sound very Heavensward, and also Alphino and Estinian are the only scions that appear in the teaser, but I don't think it's going to be as cut and dry Heavensward 2 as a lot of people are joking about it being, and I don't think it's a particularly useful comparison to make because Dawntrail was very, very different from ARR, and beyond the superficial, the premise is much closer to Shadowbringers anyway, So I'm not even going to entertain the idea of assuming that 9.0 is going to be structurally similar to Stormblood and take us to Corvos and Southern Authard or something. I would like to analyze the dialogue in the teaser itself, but it doesn't have any official subtitles, so I'm just going to read through my interpretation of the English voice track, while also putting the lines on screen as I say them, so we can all be on the same page, and focus on both those and the visuals. As for the rest of the audio, the new song sounds great already, even in its incomplete state, and I believe we already have confirmation that Jason Charles Miller is involved, so we could safely say there's a lot to look forward to in the final version. I will say though, there's a lot of very similar instrumentation to Footfalls going on here, which yes, does make sense given the tone shift back to more serious after Dawntrail, but I did actually think the opening riff was going to be a new cover of Footfalls, and there was going to be some sort of Endwalker recap before jumping into the new expansion thing, which is more on me than anything else, but I thought it was funny. The other funny thing is, the only characters that are actually voiced in the teaser are the Aura child and the old woman who's narrating the story to them, so we don't know anything about what they're going to be about during the expansion, but it did allow Colin Ryan to be just as confused and surprised by this announcement as everyone else, despite his own character being in the trailer. Yeah, I know the VAs don't get the full context for all the scenes they're in, and I'm sure they get even less when they're recording for a teaser like this, but it do still be more than nothing. Anyway, the dialogue begins with the child saying, "One more time? It's my favorite story." And the old woman responds, "Oh, but you know it better than me by now. But if you insist." The kid then says, "Yes, all right, I'm ready. Tell me about the Promised Land." And the old woman begins the primary narration of the trailer. "Long, long ago, in a time few yet recall, life prospered, for the world was rich in plenty. Majestic trees stood sentinel over lands without end. From towering peaks sprang rivers, flowing into and feeding great seas, and noble kingdoms flourished, wanting for naught. But then came the relentless ice. The world grew cold, cold and still. Man succumbed to bitter sorrow. And as we struggled to survive, they marched, and all was lost. We had no choice but to flee to the skies." Cutting back to the framing device, the child says, "And then what happened?" The storyteller cracks a slight smile and says, "The land below became a frozen waste, but everything changed when they arrived." The child asks, "The traveler? The one from the sky?" And the old woman responds, "Aye. Though in those days, we knew them as..." And unfortunately, part of the very last phrase is something I can't really hear because of all the lightning and storm sound effects. The final word is definitely wanderer, but I can't tell what the first word is. It seems like this is a proper title, but I can't quite tell if she's just saying the wanderer or something a little bit more unique and complex like far wanderer. I think the far wanderer makes the most sense here, but I can't hear it. We might need to wait for the next trailer where that line will be placed over something without as many sound effects. The more recent visitor from the sky is almost certainly us, and though I do have my doubts that this mysterious wanderer from the past is also us, I think it's very crucial to point out that that wanderer is indeed another word for traveler, and even more so, the child just straight up refers to us as the traveler, the one from the sky. So, we are literally being referred to with the same title of the seat of Azem, which, when combined with the key, clearly having something to do with Azem as well. All of this talk about fate and stuff relating specifically to us. No leads on the whereabouts or identities of the Azem shards from the 4th and the 9th, and the beginning of the teaser showing the key combining with the Azem crystal, which supposedly contains their memories, which we haven't been able to access yet. I think that whatever we're doing here is not simply us carrying on the actions the seat of Azem was expected to take, and those our Unsundered self did way back in the day, but literally something set up for us by Azem in the past. Like, there had to be a reason why Vana, and not us Azem, was the one who chose to be Hydaelyn, and a reason why Emmett kept Azem's soul crystal, in spite of both Azems he knew working against the Zodiark plan. It's very possible that while Vana underwent the process to turn into a primal, to sunder the world and stop the immediate concern of Zodiark in the final days, the Azem that became us was laying plans for what came after, and to protect the world in the far future once Hydaelyn, Zodiark, and many of the last traces of the Ancients were entirely gone. There has to be a reason Azim refused the call to partake in the summoning of Hydaelyn after all, and it very well could have been because they were looking even further to the future, far beyond the final days. Is this just returning back to the Ascians and ancient plotlines and lore that everyone loved from Shadowbringers and Endwalker rather than trying something new? Arguably yes, but if Azim's plan for their own sundered reincarnations in the future was to continue traveling around and helping people, and the main story of EVERCOLD is indeed a bit more self-contained thing to the fourth, then I'm not particularly bothered by that, when the ties back to the Ancients are more set-dressing to explain how there can still be major shard-threatening threats in a post-Zodiark world, and Halmarit, the new Convocation member we've been introduced to, seems to be an Ascian more to facilitate her being a long-lived person with a long memory, and the Winterers being a multi-shard organization over everything else. I also think it's worth talking about another set of phrases in gold text used in the keynote describing the fourth. A reflection fallen into ruin, ravaged by ever-spreading ice, and with whom you will make it, what awaits you there, and who is the Wanderer. Alright, I know it's kind of hypocritical for me to say this, especially because in my Dawn Trail predictions and trailer analysis video, I did accurately call that the whole Scions Divided plotline was going to go absolutely nowhere, but I think the fact that they are asking who the Wanderer is suggests that it is something a little bit more complicated than just us going to the fourth for a little bit, popping back, spending enough time in the source that thousands of years pass on the fourth or whatever because time dilation, and then going back properly for the expansion. It's probably someone else, though the possibility of them being another Azim Shard or even our own previous incarnation who had the key in the past is very on the table. Also, asking with whom we will be traveling to this new reflection seems to indicate that, first off, this might not be a planned trip by all of the Scions, and second off, it might not just be Scions going there, which, in terms of not having the cast as over-bloated and filled up with Scions, many of whom have completed their character arcs, and none of whom can have meaningful interpersonal conflict because they all agree with each other on everything, is a good thing, but it also raises the question of who else is coming with us. Now, I would love to say Shale, but if Shale is joining the Scions, she's probably joining as a tech support specialist, like in the sense of being able to do more cyberpunk tech that Graha's expertise with Allagan stuff might not cover. Yeah, a bunch of members of Oblivion were knockoff machinists, but I can't recall ever having seen Shale with a gun in her hand, so unless we're pulled into the fourth involuntarily, I can't see her being one of the people joining us. Euless, Zero, and Golbez are pretty strong contenders, of course, because they are returning characters who we are going to be seeing in 7.5, and if some kind of involuntary shard suckage occurs, yeah, someone getting yanked from Garlemald, ending up in an even more frozen over, inhospitable hellscape, would be really, really funny. But I also think Euless, after having gone through his own character arc, would be able to provide perspective and warmth to the people of the fourth in a fairly unique way, and I think it would be interesting to see him bounce off of some of the main cast members on a more long-form basis. While I'm certain they're cutting around things to mask 7.5 spoilers, this teaser is very unique among all of the ones 14 has had so far in that it is the first FanFest trailer, and yet it feels pretty complete. This teaser is almost 2 full minutes longer than the Dawn Trail teaser from its NA FanFest, and only a minute and a half shorter than the full Dawn Trail trailer, and we have 2 more iterations at later FanFests to go. On top of that, we already see Meteor fighting as a Viper, but him becoming a Reaper at the end of the teaser is clearly the big important face job of the expansion, which suggests to me that him being Viper earlier on isn't to hide him having changed to one of the new jobs, but a deliberate choice to show him in the same state from Dawn Trail, which again suggests to me that this trip to the fourth is immediate off the heels of 7.5 and possibly unexpected. That being said, the fight scene is definitely the most unfinished looking part of the trailer, so they are almost certainly hiding something there, especially because of how short it is. First of all, they're jumping out of a portal in the sky pretty nonchalantly, and that portal is orange and has Azim-looking stuff around it, so yep, we're definitely using the crystal and the key in some sort of combination to do whatever's going on here. And secondly, yeah, this is the most unfinished looking part, all 3 characters are pretty clearly outright using their models from the Dawn Trail cinematic, which I'm pretty certain is a placeholder because I think everyone got new models in between Endwalker and Dawn Trail, And if the Scion roster is being cut down a little bit for EVERCOLD, it would be really surprising they wouldn't give the couple returning characters new ones as well. Doesn't look like we're getting the source side time skip I've been hoping for quite yet, but hey, there's always a chance that Alphino's adult model hasn't been revealed yet. I'm still holding out cope for that. Age the twins up, please. That's like one of the few character-related things you can do for most of the Scions. And yeah, that is one thing that has me a little trepidatious, just based on the teaser. Now, I'm sure more characters will be there, but just Alphino and Estinian. They are great characters, but I think we've plumbed almost all the depths of having them be the main focus for an expansion. Revisiting some themes and concepts of Heavensward again doesn't mean just bring back all of the surviving cast members. And especially if you throw my character in the mix, the party for this expansion looks overwhelmingly Elezen and overwhelmingly male, which also doesn't seem particularly conducive to any interesting dynamic whatsoever. I think we probably always should take a Scion or two along with us no matter where we go for every expansion, and the issue with Dawntrail was just having all of them there when not many of them had anything to do, but it shouldn't really have been both of these two. Bits of post-Endwalker and post-Dawntrail notwithstanding, Stormblood was the last expansion where Alphino was not one of the main party members traveling with you for the lion's share of the story. Now, Estinian, we're probably due for more Estinian. He hasn't been seen at all in any of the Dawntrail patches, and spent basically all of 7.0 babysitting cowboys and playing Monster Hunter on the Vidral population until it was time to just somehow find his way to Everkeep so the Zeralja fight could be a duty support trial. But the cynical part of me really can't see these characters specifically together having any interactions in this new expansion other than, this is an entire shard that is cold and covered in ice. Alphino, maybe you should gather firewood so that we can make a big fire to warm this entire area up. Or characters just being like, yup, we have been through this before, we know exactly what to do, and solving a lot of problems with basically no conflict. That approach worked really well in 7.4 because it was all of our past accomplishments coming with us into the 9th to be able to solve a lot of their problems and connect them back to what was left of the rest of Alexandria, but for an entire expansion, that would get really boring really quickly. It's also why I'm really happy the Doom Train wasn't an Asm Crystal fight. Not every trial needs to be that level of importance. So it's good that they're choosing to step back the stakes, at least a little bit like that sometimes. I was kind of hoping Kryl would be a shoo-in for any shard-hopping plotlines once we learned that she was not born on the source, but we see no indications of her here, unfortunately. And I guess Y'shtola doesn't really care a lot about other reflections unless it's specifically going back to the first, because she's not there either. If I'm being really honest, besides giving Y'shtola enough actual focus to give her a character that has development, Estinian Graha is the Scion pairing that I most wanted to see have a lot more interactions with each other, because they are very contrasting, have not really shared a lot of screen time together, and are ultimately still both the new kids on the block. Considering there are only 3 characters jumping out of the portal, neither Estinian nor Alphino can tank, a new tank job is being introduced in this expansion, and they pose the question of who's coming with us in a way that indicates the characters we just saw in the trailer would not be the only ones. I'm not actually concerned yet, they just led with the 2 characters that are kind of the least interesting in that combination to me. Unrelated to any of that, why does Estinian dropkick one of the enemies there? He plants his lance in the ground and then vaults off of it to kick instead of just stabbing like, an actual lance wielder would. I can't even call this advertising for the job animation reskin feature because the Dragoon pole dance animation isn't pole dancing to kick. It's pole dancing and then picking the lance up and slashing with it. It's not even a reference to Evolve Mode Dragoon, because that has even more regular Dragoon style jumps than current Reborn Mode Dragoon does. What is bro doing? If it wasn't for him still using the lance to vault up, I almost would have said that this is Estinian's model put over lease for some reason, hiding the fact that she's coming back. Now, theoretically, Estinian could be taking on the new tank job, but I find that highly unlikely, as he's the only member of the Scions who holds a literal military position, including the name of his job. Now, yeah, I know he's one of the very few Scions who's still using an ARR job, but the funny Joe Cat soundbite calls him a Dragoon. It would be really weird for him to not be a Dragoon. The only way I could see him changing is if the new job also uses some sort of pole arm, like a lance and shield heavy lancer type fighter instead of the more agile spear-based Dragoon, But considering Yoshi P's shirt tease was Riditin, it seems more likely that the new tank is going to be shield-based, possibly even a dual shield job, and I'm guessing it's going to be a traditional Rogadin martial art from Airslint, just so there can be a Nordic-themed job without having to get a character from the 4th into the source to teach it to us, and that does not fit Estinian at all. They didn't do it to show off Kryl shifting to Picto and Dawntrail, but we could very easily see a repeat of how they showed off Sage Alphino in the Endwalker trailer by having the 3 guys get overwhelmed by these new enemies, and then someone else jumps out of the portal as one of the new jobs to make the save. With the exception of Red Mage, every new job since Stormblood has been shown off in the cinematic trailer, shoehorned in as Dancer was for Shadowbringers, so this would be a prime place to show off one of the new ones. And even though it has been confirmed both jobs will be 14 originals, so we're not getting Puppet Master Halmarit wielding the Calyx Labubu as her weapon, if she does end up being directly relevant in this storyline, we could still see her as more likely the Fizz range than the tank, I think. Now, as for some of the main motifs of EVERCOLD, clearly ancient Nordic cultures and Norse mythology are going to be major touchstones and inspirations. You can see that just based on the aesthetic, and while they already use the names Midgardsormr, Nidhogg, and Ratatosk on dragons, I think Nidhogg is the only one who skewed close enough to the mythological figure to not be able to use the reference again. And, well, Calyx has turned into a squirrel, there's your Ratatosk, and there are several snake motifs in a few places, so it's looking like we're going to get a more proper Jormungand. And hey, they can even just use that name instead of Midgardsormr because they're different names referring to the same mythological entity in the first place. I'd also very much like to point out this specific piece of concept art. Now, one of the in-game screenshots provided does show what looks like the base of this building, as we can see the bottom snakehead, but the concept art shows that the tower in the middle continues up higher to another smaller snakehead, and a little helmet-looking thing on top of that, plus a bunch of branches sprouting off. And that helmet looks a little bit familiar because that, while not exact, looks a whole lot like Exdeath from Final Fantasy V. Now it's time for an important tangent. Exdeath is the main antagonist of Final Fantasy V. He is associated with trees. One of his goals is to claim the power of the Void, once wielded by the ancient warlock Enuo. The same Enuo who, while he was just a backstory character in the original FF5, got fleshed out a bit and turned into a super boss in later remakes, and is going to be the basis for the 7.5 trial fight. Oh, also, Final Fantasy V contains a world that gets split into 2, has an interdimensional rift in between them, and then those worlds are eventually merged back together, so surely that doesn't mean anything. People were expecting the FF7 expansion next. I'm almost certain 9.0 is going to be that, but it looks like we're getting a lot of 5, which makes it even weirder that Kryl isn't involved, and that they did Occult Crescent with all the FF5 references for Dawntrail. Now, admittedly, the original FF5 version of Exdeath was recreated by Omega and fought during that raid series, and Enuo's power is associated with the Void, not Cold, plus we are going to the 13th for that trial in 7.5. But I do find it hard to believe this is all a coincidence. We've only heard about Void Gates going between the 13th and the Source, and presumably that is made easier by their extreme proximity relative to each other, but it's never been confirmed that they can't access other shards, period. And since Enuo is likely an extremely powerful warlock, maybe he was the first Void sent to breach somewhere other than the Source, and access the 4th in some way, affecting things, maybe making the impending Calamity of Ice a little bit more sinister or something like that, and somehow setting up tree-related stuff and Exdeath or whatever. Now, while I do think it would be interesting for something to happen in 7.5, and that's what causes all of the ice to encroach over the 4th, and then we actually travel there in EVERCOLD a lot later in that shard's timeline, that doesn't seem to be the case, because I straight up reject the notion that the Great Frost was caused by something other than Ascian meddling with the etherical balance of the shard, and nothing we can do now would cause effects earlier in the 4th's timeline than all of that Ascian meddling. Plus, we've used time on shard moves much faster than time on source twice already, so it would be kind of neat to have the opposite for once, though I don't think that's going to be the case in EVERCOLD, as it seems like enough stuff has happened in the history of the 4th to where it wouldn't make sense if the total time since the Sundering on that shard was a lot shorter than it was on the Source. Another thing that's pretty intriguing to me are these mysterious arcane titans that roam the world of the 4th, and it's unknown whether they're friend or foe, or how they even came to be. Also, yes, I should have brought these up when I made the Xenoblade 2 reference earlier. Shut up. Wait, is that concept art more Ardain? Are we actually getting the Xenoblade 2 expansion? That was a joke. I would be very okay with this. Put Nopon in 14. The Titans are shown in the trailer when the lines of "they marched" are said, and it seems to indicate that they destroyed what was left of civilization on the surface of the Fourth. But that doesn't mean they were intentionally malevolent or Ascian creations. Remember, we know that the Ascians just taught people summoning on the 13th. It seems like they might have done something different to the 9th, but we don't actually know anyone who interacted with an Ascian on the 9th. We don't know if Halmarit was involved in unbalancing the 9th at all. Yeah, they might have just used Electrope, but we don't know where Electrope is from either. It could have been native to another shard we haven't seen yet. It could have been native to the 4th, and taking that Electrope out could have led to some sort of etheric unbalance or whatever. We also know precious little of the 1st prior to the Flood of Light. It does not seem like primals were a big deal during Ardbert's time, but maybe they were employed in the past to help tip things closer to the imbalance of light that we saw, and we just haven't checked records enough to tell that was the case. The Titans are also pretty clearly not primals themselves. If they were, the entire surface of the 4th would be a The Burn-style hellscape instead of a Frozen-style hellscape, and aesthetically they also don't match Ascian stuff, so that does let me think that maybe they were some sort of defense mechanism created by mages or something on the 4th that ended up going rogue, or just weren't able to stop the Flood of Frost, or what have you. I do think that there's a decent chance that at some point during 8.x, we do somehow find out what Ascian involvement on the 4th was like, but I don't think this was part of it. I'm also not sure what form any references to the Norse gods themselves will take. Yes, Odin already exists as a primal on the source, but that doesn't mean we can't have an actual character at some point on the 4th that is closer to the mythological Odin, similar to what I talked about with Jormungand versus Midgardstormr before. I'm saying this because I do anticipate there to be references to at least some Norse deities, but I don't think those are going to be connected to the Ascians at all, because they've been very, very heavily associated with Greek mythology, and even Vana, who is the odd one out in terms of names for the ancients, is still named after Venus, so she is technically the Aphrodite rep. Everyone's treating it as a foregone conclusion that Halmarit's ancient name was Demeter, and I wholeheartedly agree with that. I can't see her being anything else, especially since Gaia has already been used. So if they connect her to the Norse thing, it's going to be through her being the botanist of the Convocation and named after a goddess of agriculture, tying that to Norse mythology's heavy emphasis on the world tree Yggdrasil, an element that's already been present in 14 for a very long time, and was referenced as recently as last patch, heavily implying that the 9th Shard's version of FF9's Aoife tree is that shard's world tree, also indicating that it is not just the source that has a tree, and then there's a big icy tree in the trailer, so I think this is all connected. It seems to me like, though the world is primarily inspired by real-world cultures, and not any Final Fantasy game in particular, the themes and philosophy behind EVERCOLD is going to be a combination of Final Fantasy VII's environmentalism, depending on how important the winters and Calyx are, there could be shades of Shinra in there too, and Final Fantasy V's world hopping, combining worlds that were once separate, and trees holding great power. Also, the structure of the 4th itself, with the surface of the planet being uninhabitable and everyone living in the sky, with a bunch of mysterious quasi-divine entities roaming around, is similar to FF13, so there could be some stuff related to that in there too, and maybe even one of the new jobs could be inspired by the playstyle of one of 13's party members. Now, assuming that all of EVERCOLD takes place on the 4th, and we don't do a little bit of exploring of the source before or after our visit there, and there isn't a surprise other shard hop at the end, like with the 9th and Dawntrail, I think it's pretty likely that at least 4 of the 6 new areas are going to be different sky islands or different archipelagos, with each being inspired by a different one or more of the 9 realms of Norse mythology. I think Helheim is going to be excluded from this because I would be very, very surprised if there isn't an area set on the surface amidst all the frost at the base of the frost tree we see. And yep, that is just Helheim. I think that one's covered at least. But I don't think that is going to be the true final reference to the 9 realms that we're going to have in the end. And that is because of an alternate reading of Unite the Stars unto One. What if we don't rejoin them all fully, but what if we link them in a more tangible way through all of the world trees and make them actually connected to each other in a similar way to the 9 realms? I think this would be a really cool way to go, because this is using a pre-Ancients solution to a problem caused by the Ancients. Yeah, the current crisis might be caused by actions the Ancients took, but we're going further back in the history of Atheris than even then to find the solution. And that's because world trees are not an Atheris exclusive thing. We without a doubt see a recreation of the Omicron's world tree in Ultima Thule. I want to say there's some NPC dialogue that also indicates the Dragon Star had one too, but I might be wrong on that. And then on top of that, Rala's arena is called the World Tree too. So that was that planet's world tree being recreated. It seems like planets that have life have world trees for whatever reason. The life stream predated the Ancients. It makes sense that the will of the star is a real tangible thing beyond just Zodiark and Hydaelyn. The planet does have some sort of presence, and that manifests in world trees. So, if the star was sundered into a bunch of different pieces, it might be possible to link those pieces together not by rejoinings, but by connecting the ether of all the world trees. This would likely provide stability to the other shards if they truly are fading away or drifting away from the source, causing them to run out of ether, and is also a very interesting way to do inter-shard travel without relying on the key for everything, as well as getting rid of our monopoly on such transport, potentially allowing more other conflicts to arise in the future. Now, I am going to guess that this connection is not something that we can just do with all of the shards at once. You probably have to have a shard's world tree in a decent state in order to do so, and you probably have to link the shard to the source using the key from that shard. So I doubt we're just immediately going to connect all 6 remaining shards at the same time, but we could then go back to the 13th in an 8.0 patch, properly link that to the source, allowing people to travel freely between the source, the 13th, and the 4th. Then we could go to the 1st, discover where the first world tree is. If it was overrun by the Flood of Light, make Eden mandatory, and we could just say Reen and Gaia discovered a new world tree growing out in the empty. Then, at some point, we can go to the 9th. There's a decent chance the Aoife tree is just still around, so as long as we stop the lightning from constantly striking that, we could heal that, then connect the 9th. And so forth with the other 2 remaining shards. Now, why am I so confident something like this is possible? Well, the biggest hint towards the 8.0 story we were given prior to this fanfest was Yoshi P acknowledging the high demand for a Mericidia expansion, and basically directly saying, yes, that is going to happen eventually, but it is not going to be 8.0. I know when we're going there, we just can't do so quite yet. Now, up until the EVERCOLD reveal, I wasn't completely convinced. He could have just been PR speaking, obfuscating things for a big surprise at FanFest, or depending on how globetrotting we went in 8.0, there could be like one area on the shore of Mericidia and we explore the continent proper in a later expansion. But I think I now know exactly why this is the case, and why he was able to speak so authoritatively about that, other than the fact that clearly 8.0's premise had already been locked in by then. The source has several world tree adjacent things, some of which might just be clippings of the actual one, but do you know where it has been confirmed the proper full world tree on the source has been? This is something we've known since at least Heavensward. That's right, Mericidia. So if we manage to save the 4th and successfully link it to the source in EVERCOLD, there's a good chance that we've just opened up a portal from the surface of the 4th to the middle of Mericidia, which, I don't know, that kind of sounds like a big plot hook for 9.0 to me. Yeah, this is a bit of a big shot call, but I think it makes sense, especially since it seems like the overarching thing of this new saga is exploring the shards and seeing what's happening to them, while fending off the Winterers and preserving them in our own way. The 4th being the way it is suggests to me that the name Winterers is not just metaphorical, but started out literally. I am guessing that even though the organization has grown beyond that, having representatives at least on the 9th as well, the 4th is where the Winterers started, and it probably, similar to how Preservation turned into what it did, grew out just of a group of people trying to survive the initial flood of frost. Seeing how Halmarit herself pretty clearly isn't the leader of the Winterers, if all the theories I mentioned way earlier are true, then she could have lost her original home to a calamity of ice, saw something similar encroaching on the 4th, sympathized with whoever founded the Winterers organization, lent them Ascian-related stuff to get their whole thing going, and then traveled to other shards once she learned of similar issues plaguing them, recruiting Calyx, probably recruiting people on other shards, and so forth and so forth. We also don't know if Halmarit is the only Convocation member involved in the Winterers, or, more broadly, the only Ascian. I'm fairly certain that Black-Masked Ascians can still traverse the Rift and go to other shards, so they could be around doing that, and the reason Halmarit specifically was sent to pick up Calyx was they wanted to introduce an important story-related character instead of just sending a random mook. EVERCOLD is also the first expansion that definitively started being planned after FF16 was done, so it is possible we're going to see a little bit of influence in that as well, which I think is notable in this structure that we see in the trailer as part of one of the prosperous kingdoms on the surface, but then also definitely see later on what appears to be one of the Sky Islands as a big massive crystal behind a regular-sized aetheryte that could just be a mother crystal from 16 scaled down a little. And the frozen over world tree back in the teaser cinematic also looks like it could be a mother crystal, though it might just be a cool looking frozen tree, we don't know. I'm not sure what bearing this, if any, could have over the overall plot of EVERCOLD and later expansions, but I do think it's at least an intentional visual reference, and if not that, a case of concept artists who worked on both games. The thing that confuses me most, though, is the aura that vanishes into snow, but is then also on the logo of the expansion, this being the only time a specific defined character is in an expansion logo besides Lys in Stormblood, which seems to suggest to me that she's a pretty important character. But does her fading into snow there mean that she is dead? That she became one with the winter? Is she the one controlling the Titans? I don't know. She could very easily be a posthumous character or something like the Ardbert for this expansion. Based on Lys, her being in the expansion art would indicate she's the narrator. And then there's also the guy behind her, who is an older looking man with a blue glowing eye. But in the zoom out shot, if you look closely, you can see his left eye is missing. So yeah, I do believe we found our Odin analog for the game. The way he's framed seems to imply that he would be an antagonist, but he might be an antagonist in the sense that the Winterers are nominally our antagonists right now, but we do ultimately share the same goal, and I think he's a very good candidate for the founder. And yup, there's a vaguely Aerith-coated woman praying, and then she disappears, and a guy with a glowing bluish eye is behind her, so, you know, there could be some more FF7 stuff in that. This might be a case of wait and see until the next FanFest, when I'm sure we're going to get an introduction to at least one of these characters, and from that I'll be able to suss out everything. But the whole prayer thing could also be a much less effectual version of Exarch Graha trying to summon the Scions over from the source to help out. Maybe she called out praying to the World Tree, and it took a very long time for her message to be heard, and we only receive it now in a true time of crisis much, much later down the line. Maybe her spirit merged with that of the tree, and she'll be able to communicate with us in a similar way to Hydaelyn or again Ardbert. Maybe she is our shard on the 4th. I don't know. She seems very, very posed to be an ally, and I personally would like at least one major expansion antagonist to be an evil Azem shard, but that's just something I want to happen eventually before we discover all of our shards. And even if the 4th is indeed off the table, there's still 3 options to go, so I won't even be mildly disappointed if it doesn't happen here. And then there's the case of the framing device, and whether or not it is simply a framing device for the trailer, or depicts actual characters. It could just be a framing device to better set the scene as a reference to the Old Norse sagas, but the young Aura who the story is being told to has the same skin, hair, and scale colors as the praying Aura woman who disappears, so they could be a descendant or a reincarnation. And if they are an Azem shard, a Reen equivalent, or even just someone with the Echo, they could be a pretty important character and key to either ending the winter, shutting down the Titans, or doing something related to the 4th's world tree. If there was also a wanderer from another shard that came to the 4th and did something to change things prior to us arriving, then maybe the disappearing Aura called that person with her prayer, and this child, upon loving to hear the story so much, accidentally called us in, or sent out a call that we were able to respond to using the key in the Azem Crystal. The real question then is who is the Wanderer, and who would the storyteller be? Is there a bit of a Bragi reference with this character? Why is she hooded? Many questions, but there are two things of note. The first is that she is a magic user. We can pretty clearly see her conjure a flame to light an oil lamp. And the second is that she appears to be a Makote. In the wide shot of the bed, you can actually see her tail moving. Now, because of the shadows, you can't quite see what color it is, but I think it's either brown or white. If it's brown, this is most likely just a new character, so I think it would be a little bit interesting to have Makote resident to this shard, which has its own unique race of cat people. But then again, Loporritz and Vieira both exist technically on the source, so what do I know? But if it's white, then fire magic using white-haired Makote with a hood on. Are they gonna do the exact same Y'shtola reveal they did back in Shadowbringers again? Would they be willing to let Y'shtola, the waifu of the game, get this old at all in the first place? The English VA is also definitely not Y'shtola's, but maybe they wanted to recast for an older version of the character? And if she is actually able to become a proper Master Matoya in her own right, that would be an interesting way to take her character. Also, her wanting to do shard travel stuff and accidentally getting stuck on a different shard than the one she wants to go back to, with us only reaching her again once she's aged considerably, possibly being out of time sync with Runar, who she wanted to reunite with, could give a lot of expansion to her character, especially because we don't really learn much information about how her time in the first prior to us showing up there affected her beyond her making friends with the Knights Blessed. So even though this would be a bit of a more extreme level redo of something from Shadowbringers, it could bring a whole new level of expansion to certain characters. And yeah, if something like this is happening again, then there's a good chance the end of 7.5 is going to be a bit more tragic than we think. Because the poster job for this expansion is Reaper, and the new artifact outfit is very similar to Zero's original garb. Now yes, Reaper is just also a symbolic thing because death, winter, and maybe Reaper also in terms of reaping the fields once we cause a new spring to happen, but what if we're taking on this mantle as an homage to Zero? Be it through Enuo or another summoning gone awry, what if while we're on the 13th, something happens, Zero and maybe Y'shtola also are dragged into the 4th, and people mistake our later coming to try and find them as the second coming of the legendary Wanderer. Think about it. Who is the most Warrior of Light-like person that we currently know? I'd probably say Zero. Yeah, Durante picked up the mantle and appearance of Golbez, who was actually our shard on the 13th, but the entire point of Post-Endwalker is that, in her own way, Zero is the one truly embodying the Azim spirit, and is the one to ultimately restore a bit of light to the void. Based on the wording of the old storyteller, the ice happened, everyone took to the skies, the Titans started their eternal march, and then the Wanderer first appeared, and everything changed, presumably for the better. You could also interpret the framing device as taking place in the future after the end of EVERCOLD, and the Wanderer's first visit was our first visit to the 4th, but then there's still talk about us making another visit that's much more contemporary to this child. So unless the 4th runs incredibly fast relative to the source, and they're somehow able to configure the zones such that we actually go to the 4th, return back for long enough for generations to pass and our legend to fade into myth, and then return again to save things properly now that we're there for longer. But then why would there even be mystery about the identity of the Wanderer? Yeah, the Scions being divided didn't amount to anything, but at least it was something that actually happened. It would be kind of insane for them to tease this mystery, only for us to very clearly be that in the MSQ. Now the other thing is, maybe there's time travel involved. I kinda don't want this. I think it was used enough in Alexander. Could Alexander have something to do with the 4th? I don't know. Maybe he's a primal that crossed over from there. There's a couple aesthetic things in concept art that looks a little bit like that, and he was involved with some Zayla, so that could be something, but I kind of doubt it. And Endwalker's closed loop was a good way to just visit the past, learn some secrets that we couldn't learn just by talking to people who were there because all the Unsundered are on and all that, and not actually affect anything. If this is time travel, we would be actually making our second visit for us before our first visit, then actually going back in time and changing things to set up what we do later in time. I don't think I'd like that. I think we're doing multiverse. We don't also need to do time travel. Just make it simple. Make there be some mysterious person who's either an ally of ours who got caught and time dilation put them generations behind. Something like that. Maybe a past source incarnation of Azim found the key, went to the fourth, did some stuff there, and then the key somehow ended up in the hands of the Malala, who fled the source to the ninth from another later umbral calamity after all this stuff in the fourth happened. That could be something interesting. I would love to learn more about our previous incarnations, not just our living existing shards. But just, if the Wanderer does end up being us, make it in a way where we can't clearly tell a plot twist coming. Don't make anything have to do with time travel. And just give us a cool new story on this cool new shard in a cool new expansion that leads cool new places. I said cool, forgetting that it's a winter-themed thing without realizing, so that's also pretty awesome. As much as I'd love to end the video by saying, oh well, this will all be irrelevant in a couple days because 7.5 is out, the good news is this is going to at least have enough staying power to last us to the next FanFest, because as far as we know, the 7.56 MSQ is going to be nearly as long as base 7.5, and both are going to be about the same length as a normal MSQ patch. So, there's a very good chance that we won't get any new information besides a little bit more explanation of what exactly is going on to the shards and Helmerit's motivations until then. So, yeah, I'll see you for a later trailer analysis once we get the second FanFest. Check back in after Berlin for more. They sure said that a lot during the keynote, so I get to say that once too. And until next time, also check my second channel for when I discuss all the other stuff about like the system changes. I don't think that's going to be a main channel video. I also don't think that's going to come out anywhere before 7.5. I have another Xenoblade video to make by the end of this month, so I'm going to be pretty busy, not including the patch. But yeah, till then, this is Luxon, signing off.